Welcome, everybody, to our quarterly webinar that Steve and I have been putting on for a bit of time now. Today, we are talking about risk-based approach, risk-based thinking within your quality management system processes and how that returns some business value back to your organization. We often talk about how the quality management system needs to have a return on investment. You have to get something back for what you're doing. And so with that, we can go ahead on to the first slide, Steve, and you want to pick up.
Yeah, so I think one of the key points I always like to make, people say, well, what is this thing, about this risk-based approach or risk-based thinking? And I remind people it's there, it's right in the standards. It's not like um, you know, something that we just talk about. It is built into the standards. And if we look at 9001, right away into the very first section of the document, clause 0.1, it jumps right in and says, besides the process approach, which is a whole other big topic, that this standard incorporates risk-based thinking, right? So they establish that intent right off the bat. It continues on talking about why that's important, um, and then again repeats it in how you manage the system. That risk considerations have to be part of that.
Right.
They go
And
into
I think a
yeah,
big reason it starts off with that is, I mean, risk-based thinking and risk-based approach is really about right sizing the quality management system to your organization so that I mean, larger organizations need more details, need more controls in their quality management system processes. Smaller organizations can have less controls, and right sizing it to your organization makes sense.
yeah, and I think that's the two-pronged benefit, right, of using this approach. One, it helps you be more effective, right? Because we're going to talk about how it's really part about how you make decisions within your quality system so that you are effective. But on the efficiency side, as you just said, it then helps you determine, where do I need more prescription in my QMS or more rigidity, and where can I have less? Well, you make that choice based on the risks involved. And that's the kind of language you see throughout these. Clause 3 within 9001 is about the process approach. And in a subset of that, in 0.3.3, is they have a section that says, oh, and part of the process approach is risk-based thinking, right? And they talk right there, what I was just saying, it's essential for achieving an effective quality system. And you'll hear us talk a lot today about that this is really part of how you make decisions within your quality system. And then in clause 0.4, they talk about that, this isn't unique to 9001. It is, part of a broader concept that really appears in a lot of different standards and regulations, for that matter. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the med device standard ISO 1345. It's in there again. So
And,
they're
and
establishing, if you think of 9001 as sort of the foundational thing for quality, they're establishing, look, this concept is not going to be unique here. It is going to propagate through quite a few standards and regulations that you will likely have to apply together.
and I mean, as you kind of think through it, I mean, that makes sense that management is always concerned about what's the risk here. And so as you have a management standard, they're asking about, what can go wrong? What's the risk?
Yeah, and that's something management is always usually should be concerned with, right, in running a business. So again, it's not some sort of new hoop they're putting in place. They're going, look, as a business leader, you probably want to be thinking about risks anyway. You should be already. And then you can see right here, we jump right into clause 51111. And right there, they remind you that, yeah, well, leadership's responsible for this, for promoting this concept for both the process approach and risk-based thinking. They go hand in hand really well. And then for more detail, there's an entire appendix dedicated to risk-based thinking and how you apply that. And then another appendix that talks specifically about when you're dealing with your supply chain and anything you're getting from external providers, that the degree of control, the degree of vetting that you do, the degree of active management, right, is
How much
based
incoming
on.
inspection you do?
Yeah, right. How can I go dock to stock, or do I need to go to lab inspections or something like that, right? That whole gamut. Well, it depends on the risks. Do I need to issue monthly performance reports to a supplier based on the risk, right? There's all those kind of decisions that it all comes down to there isn't a one size fits all. You get to size your quality system appropriately based on the risks, and not just the entire quality system, but elements of it, right? Right down to, like we're saying, specific suppliers, specific processes, specific components. All of it is part of this broader sense of risk-based thinking.
Yeah.
Um,
And so then when we brought that into 1345, we brought it into clause 4.1. 4.1.2b is the paragraph number. In applying the risk-based approach to the controls of the appropriate processes needed for your quality management system. So that's how we brought that controls piece in as we were writing, 1345.
Yeah, and I mean the terminology is slightly different, risk-based approach, but if you bother to read all of the standard, you'll see the concepts are essentially the same, even if they just slightly changed the wording there. And then, throughout 1345, where your hints are of when you're supposed to do this is you'll see wording along the lines of proportionate to the risk. The degree of control of your suppliers is proportionate to the risk. There's all those kind of phrases in there. 7 times it uses that kind of terminology, and that's when the light bulb should go on. And you go, oh, they're talking about risk-based approach or risk-based thinking here, and that this is where we get to make a decision based on the risks.
And then
A
we
lot
we
of
picked
times that has to do with, how fast do you need to go on certain things, right? How
and
soon
that's why we picked it up in the time pieces. So any place
yeah.
you see that time-based approach.
So just real quick as a reminder, right? The difference between risk-based approach and risk management, because what we see a lot when we're going in companies to do audits or just any kind of consultation, when we ask about risk-based approach, they typically show us their risk management procedure, right? And they're related, they're not the same thing, right? The risk-based approach is again, it's 9001, they call it risk-based thinking because it's supposed to be the mindset, right? Where, as we've just talked about, where when you're making decisions, when you have options to consider, when you have the ability to scale what you're doing, that you need to apply that risk association, right? That mindset of, yeah, what are the risks? That'll help us make the right decision here. So what it says is, right, your approach is, as we just talked about, throughout your quality system, through all the processes, you need to show that you understand how to identify the risks within that process and have an idea what to do about them, right? If you encounter them, or how do you want to head them off. The key here is this is not intended to be formal. You're not required, as we just saw, use the dot control, right? Nobody's saying, oh, you need to go produce an FMEA on your dot control process. There's no requirement for you to do any sort of formal tools. You need to go, as we're writing that SOP, have we thought about the kinds of risks Mark and I just talked about, and do we build that into that SOP? It can be very explicit. We've seen where people sometimes just put a section in each SOP called, risk considerations or something, and you just lay it out. These are the risks associated with, before you begin this process, these are the risks and these are the ways we want you to deal with that. In other places, it's just as we write the SOP, the content is based on, we've already discussed the risks, and now we're going to just lay out the SOP or the work instruction to mitigate that or accommodate that as necessary. Risk management, on the other hand, excuse me, is the formal
All right,
approach.
Steve, I just wanted to highlight for a second there.
Sure.
While the standard doesn't have any requirements for you to make this
Right.
a formal thing, it's the same thing as always. Say what you're going to do, and then do what be able to show that you did what you said you were going to do. If you say you're going to put a section in each of your procedures, then you have to do that, right? And so just be careful about how you're putting this into your processes, and don't create too much burden for yourself, because that was one of the discussions in creating this requirement, that we did not, and the reason there's no formal requirement to have a procedure to do this is because we didn't want to create that kind of burden for you to have to do that. Again, right size it to your organization and decide what you need to do is the risk-based approach in actually implementing the risk-based approach. So
Right. Now, on the other hand, the opposite is too often what I say. I'm getting ready for a client audit and I got their quality manual, and there's just sort of this vague statement in the quality manual saying XYZ Corporation applies a risk-based approach to this QMS. And then there's nothing more than that that says how. Tell me, and I'm going to walk in, and that's one of the questions I'm going to ask early in the audit is, so tell me how that gets demonstrated in the quality system, right? And I'm pretty sure they're going to like tilt their head and go, what do you mean? Or they're going to hand me their risk management SOP, and I'm going to, well, that's great when we get to the product, but I want to know what you're doing elsewhere in the quality system because you've made this statement saying you're doing it, and I don't understand how you're doing it, right? So it's a fine line between painting yourself into a corner, a compliance corner, versus not offering any indication of how you're actually doing it, which means you're not really meeting the intent, of the requirement. So on the other side, right, is then the formal aspects of when you say, all right, the approach we're going to use is a formal risk management process, right? We're going to have policy procedures. We're going to do formal analysis and evaluation. We're going to do formal, implementation of risk controls, and we're going to measure the effect of those controls. We're usually used to this in the product development side of things because there it's actually that the decision is made for you. The standards will tell you when you're developing product, guess what? It's not just consideration of risk. You will do formal risk management. So
Well,
the
and
decision
that's
is
the
made for you. Right?
in 7.1 of 1345, the one or more processes for risk management and product realization.
Yeah.
Right.
But you can also see the terminology changes. They use the term risk management in that section instead of risk-based thinking or risk-based approach. So it becomes really obvious. So that's the place where you don't get a choice, right? You're going to have to do the formal version. But there are other places where as you do your risk-based thinking about each process, the decision could be this process needs a formal risk management approach. We talked about like complaints and CAPA, and how do you triage those? How do you decide if it's really a CAPA with a capital C or is it a little CAPA, with a lowercase c? I've implemented this in many places where, there's an actual risk assessment other than just checking is it high, medium, or low, but actually saying, look, this is the decision tree for deciding whether it's high, medium, or low, which then essentially serves as a formal analysis, right? And evaluation of the risk. So you need to be thinking about that. Are there processes where you go, just thinking about it is not going to do the job. We need you to make a formal decision based on a formal process here.
All right.
You wanted to add to that, or? Yeah.
No, we're going through this, and I just want to take a little bit of a breath here for a second.
Sure.
Because I haven't heard anybody ask questions, and these are the kind of things as we're going across that, Steve and I, because in teaching so often, we come back, are you guys still awake? Is it, that kind of stuff. So, a few of the people up there, Karen, I know you're not shy, so go ahead and.
Well, I was just going to say that risk-based approach, because I have difficulty with this conversation a lot based on what I do as well. And when you say, well, it's a mindset. Well, what are the rules? Well, it depends. What do you mean it depends? Well, and you try and explain that, and because it's not formal and it's got all the right words in it, people freak out. And it's like, I don't want to create a training manual in my procedure. I just want to give you the baseline rules that you should be thinking about. And it's really tough for people to swallow. They want FMEA. They want A plus B equals C every time. And it's difficult.
Yeah, a lot of us have that kind of engineering mentality. We love an equation, right? We just enter the variables and we get an answer, right? Isn't that perfect? Isn't it? Because that's the way the world works, right? And it's not. That's the nature of risk. You just kind of talked about, the least favorite answer when I'm consulting or teaching. Well, it depends, right? You have to actually do the work to figure this out. So I think those are really good points. Mark, were you about to say something?
Well, and I think to me, there's some key aspects that you can say when you say it depends. What are some of the things it depends on? Have you ever had this problem? Have you, how many people are involved in this process? I need to add a lot more detail to a process when there's a whole bunch of people that need to know how to do this. if it's one person and they're the one person that's writing the procedure, they may not need as much detail in their procedure and what they're writing down. And so having all of that information, this is why I say you can right size it to your organization, because small and medium companies operate differently than larger companies. How far separated are you from the engineering knowledge and expertise and all that kind of stuff can feed into this. And so this is some of the things that it depends on. And you start talking about organizational maturity. As your organization matures, you see some more of the problems, you're able to adjust to those risks, and provide additional details or safeguarding, poke yoke or fixturing, these types of stuff that you might do as a risk-based approach, in order to, again, manage the risk appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to stop the micromanagement because people think that's how you get quality and that's how you get compliance if you just micromanage a process. Anyway.
That's where you say, where do you stop? Well, you stop when you consider the risk is acceptable. Are they not making the mistakes anymore?
Right.
These types of things. So
Yeah, it'd be
and
wonderful
I'll
if
say
they were a
whenever-
black and white answer, but that's not the nature of the world, right?
And I'll say a key aspect of this, and many of us do it in auditing. When you find a non-conformance, where you find an issue or potential issue, you ask, okay, what's the risk? How bad is it? How likely is that to happen? And if you can say, well, it's not really, well, then why do something about it if the risk is acceptable? Right? So, I mean, a lot of this stuff is you have to be able to analyze and think. I'm sorry that, having quality management system processes don't take the thinking out of it. And that's why I say it's kind of having this risk-based approach is that you actually have to think.
Yeah, I think that's the danger of over formalizing it everywhere, is then you take the ability to consider the actual situation, at the point in time, so that you can make the right decision, right? You've sort of removed that and go, well, now there's just one pathway. The decision's going to get calculated and everything's going to be driven off of that, whether it's the right size or not for what's actually going on, or for the organization as a whole. So good points. Anybody else have anything they want to open up their mic?
Yeah,
to?
Ivona, Mark, Susan, Dale, see all you guys here. Andrew?
No, it's very interesting, and I agree with what you said. Very good, very wise. Yes, that's true.
Thank you.
And, agree, it's not a black and white, and actually there are so many nuances of gray, and you think you addressed everything, and suddenly, another approach said, hey, did you think of this or something? Yeah, it's not, agree with you. It's, it has to be, like, and Karen said, sometimes it's micromanaging. I mean, you have to always question, don't be a burden, but at the same time, be that person that's questioning things, even if they don't like it, most of the time.
Well, you can do it in everything that you do. You can ask, what is the risk? What am I trying to prevent? What bad thing am I trying to prevent? And what's the most effective way to do that with the least amount of burden? I mean, even FDA uses the least burdensome approach, right? Come on.
I think the other thing, something just popped into my head in terms of like the terms we use and how it drives action. I think the other problem when you equate risk management and risk-based approach as the same thing, and now you over formulate, you create this extra burden. Risk management typically talks in terms of the word harm, right? That you're trying to mitigate the harm, and that has all kinds of connotations with it. Whereas Mark, I think you just started to touch on something. Harm is a broad topic, and it could just be the unexpected is a form of harm, right? If I don't get the result I expected, then essentially that's a version of harm. And that's really what the risk-based approach is about, is getting some degree of control so that you don't get surprised by things. And then that can escalate, right? And then we get into things like severity. Well, how bad is it? But there are, if you Google, the definition of risk, you will find other versions of it that talk about things like controlling, the expectations and consistency and things like that. So, among other standards, other guidance documents, there are these other concepts. What was the one I always like when I show it to my students about managing the I can't remember what the word is, but it's kind of a better way of saying it. You're managing things that could be uncomfortable, right? That's a form of harm, essentially, in our world. So, all right, excellent. Let's move on. So the gist of this, right, was we really wanted to create that foundation so we could talk about why do you want to do this, right? And I kind of picked up some hints of trying to convince your organization as to why they should have to think about this, right? And think about well, how does it depend kind of thing. So what are the business values? Because again, right, I think given our audience today, we all get quality does provide business value, quality systems provide business value. The risk-based approach does as well. So why? What are those things? We've talked a lot about this one already, right? About the decision making it evidence-based, which makes it more consistent. I mean, especially in the regulated space, consistency is everything, right? We want things to be repeatable and reliable. And if you're basing all this stuff on consideration of the risks, which we understand what they are, right? Then our ability to make those decisions, our ability for the participants in the processes to make the right decision at the right time, it increases dramatically. We're always concerned about resources. Nobody, it's rare to find a company that has infinite resources. At some point, they implode if they think they do, right? So we have limited resources, and we need to focus them. And the use of a risk-based approach, again, Mark talked about right sizing, but also, do we need to do anything about this? Because sometimes you go, the risk is low enough, even if it did occur, it's not a big deal, right? So we don't have to do anything versus, we absolutely can't let this thing happen. So yes, that's where we're going to focus our resources. So it helps you figure out criticality or priority, right? We, in FMEAs, we calculate an RPN for risk priority number. It's that kind of thinking is if we apply a risk-based approach, it should help us kind of compare the risks, right? Because we know we can't boil the ocean. We can only work on certain things. We only have a certain number of resources. So what is it that's really going to hurt us? And that's where you get the focus on. And it makes that a lot clearer. So business planning benefits from a risk-based approach. Mark, something you wanted to add, or you look like you had a thought on your? Okay, right. And then, bottom line, right? When things don't go as expected, when harm occurs, right? That's when it starts to really cost your organization money. Rework, right? Recalls, warranty costs, lawsuits, reputational problems. All of this costs you significantly on the bottom line. And a way to reduce that is if we think ahead, we put our risk-based thinking caps on and go, let's consider the risk before we get started here so that we design the process with that in mind, right? Now we're essentially doing preventive action. We are proactively thinking about, these are the things that could go wrong, so let's not get there, right? The old, don't be a good firefighter, prevent the fire from happening in the first place. And risk-based approach gives you that.
This is the reason that there is no clause on preventive action in 9001. Because if you're doing the risk-based approach and risk-based thinking, you don't need any preventive action. The other side of this is that, we know that taking action ahead of having problems is always going to cost less. And so many organizations are using, a metric, cost of poor quality, cost of poor quality, to understand this. If you want more information on that, we're glad to help out, help your organization understand how to apply this, in assessing appraisal costs versus corrective costs. All of these types of things will help your organization save money. That's the business value of having a quality management system, implementing the risk-based approach, and recognizing the value of quality, that we're not just an overhead area, but we're actually contributing back to the business.
Excellent points. All right, continuing on this theme, operational efficiency. We've been talking about right sizing the process, not making them more burdensome than they need to be for your particular business situation. So again, right, that creates actual business value, right? By, the better use of our resources, our limited resources, more efficiently, because our processes aren't crazy relative to what we're trying to do. We're making tongue depressors, not pacemakers, right? Our quality system looks very different. Our processes look different. The likelihood of certain things happening is going to be very different. Sterile versus non-sterile product, right? There's, go to a sterile device and suddenly the risks go way up. So yes, the processes have to reflect that. Non-sterile product, class 1, lower risk products. Now, you should be able to right size things so that you operate as well as you can with the resources you can and still get really good results from that. And then there's the kind of the outwardly looking piece, right? If you're a company that does a really good job of managing risk, of considering the risks and mitigating that, you look outwardly more reliable, more trustworthy, right? Your products don't, have as many recalls. You tend to have better design products because you better used your resources. You had time to and resources to focus on a better design rather than, oh shoot, we got to go fix this and fight this fire, right? And then you're distracting your resources from the things that could be really benefiting your top line growth, right? So that how you look to the market can be really important, and using a risk-based approach gets you there so that you don't have the market discovering your mistakes, right? That's obvious, as Mark just talked about. It costs you a lot more when things get out the door versus if you just put the effort in to fix them or address them, head them off beforehand. There's all kinds of studies on it. I mean, it's orders of magnitude difference in the costs. But the one that's always hard to measure is your reputation in the market. And the hit that takes. I mean, it can't be measured just simply in revenue or market share, things like that. So, doing a good risk-based approach, proactively, can definitely impact things like market share, stuff that management will understand. Related to that, right? Liability costs. It's never good to get sued. It's never good to get things like warning letters or any other regulatory actions that can escalate from there. Again, right, putting a good proactive risk-based approach in, when you're putting together your quality system and all your processes, increases the likelihood that you avoid those things, or decreases their likelihood is probably the better way.
And some of this goes, well, I look at, being court cost and liability, but what about 483s? What about, Steve mentioned warning letters, there's consent decrees out there, all of these types of things. If you've appropriately applied a risk-based approach, I don't see you ever having to worry about those things because you understand the risk and you've taken the actions appropriate to them. So I think what many of us recognize is FDA, other organizations, including notified bodies and others, if you're working with them to continue to reduce risk, they're more or less going to leave you alone. So, all these reputation things, the legal aspects, all of that will be lessened through the risk-based approach.
Yeah, Mark, and I think what you just said is very important, where the approach shows that you've done stuff intentionally and purposefully. And, we've really looked at this. And if you document that well enough, right, it shows. And I think it just proves your point. I thought it's a good statement.
Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, I think that's a really good example, right? Because we've seen that when we follow sometimes these lawsuits or the legal things that go on when companies do the wrong thing. And there's always those questions of, how come you didn't consider that, right? How did you not consider that? And to your point, Karen, right, you'll never guarantee that nothing bad will ever happen, right? The world can never be quite that perfect for you. But the idea that when something does happen, a product does fail, or somebody feels like it fails, so they feel like, and now you've got the ammunition you need to fight back, right? And go, well, yeah, we did consider that. We looked at this, and this. That was the ability we had to consider these risks, and yeah, but there's always going to be the unknown unknowns, and you learn them as you go, which implies, right, this is a life cycle approach. But yeah, it does establish this. Now we have a basis for saying, look, we did consider this,
Right.
we did our best to mitigate it, and yeah, this variable surprised us, and that's why we are. But it's not because we in the sand and didn't consider the risks. Go ahead, Karen.
Right.
You gonna say something?
No, I was just going to say that's why I love your inadequate response series. I mean, it's such valuable information, and you see it a lot.
Those are
Thanks.
full of examples of people who clearly didn't bother to do a risk-based approach, that they just focused on, it's hard to say what happens in each of those cases, but if you look at certain themes, you kind of get the sense that they tried to avoid costs early on, right? They didn't want to engage experts. They didn't want to put a more thorough quality system or processes in place, and then it bites them later. And to that point, it's really embarrassing to be on
And if
those.
anybody wants to catch up on those inadequate response series and that kind of stuff on LinkedIn, just email us and we'll give you the info at the end here to how to contact us.
Yeah. For those who aren't aware of it, that's our weekly posts on Wednesdays on LinkedIn, where we take one of the week's warning letters from FDA and kind of break down what went wrong and what probably should have happened, and how they should have avoided that in the first place. All right. And then the last bullet on here, it's funny how often quality is viewed as the enemy of speed and innovation. And I would argue it's exactly the opposite, that when you put these kind of approaches in place, it actually helps, again, provide focus. And it helps you see where are those opportunities to innovate and be more agile. So I talked earlier I mentioned, right, your business planning should also be part of applying a risk-based approach. You think about, SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, kind of analysis. That's a form of risk-based thinking, where you could go, yeah, again, to the point of being proactive and preventive is, yeah, what is it that's going to bite us, right? We're trying to create this great device. What happens if somebody creates a drug that does the same thing, right, at a tenth of the cost or something like that, or reduces the risks because now you just got to swallow a pill or take an injection versus go for surgery. A risk-based approach will help you see the future to some degree, right? And then so then what do we need to focus our resources on, right? Because otherwise, if you just go be innovative, right? Everybody's off in all kinds of different directions. Well, wait, again, we have limited resources. We have really smart people. What do we want them? Can we give them some guardrails and go, yeah, be very innovative, particularly if we've identified these opportunities or these threats. So please really put your creative minds to those things, right? So that we address them and head them off, kind of thing.
One of the things that just has popped in my mind several times, I often say, the risk-based approach is risk-based thinking is the reason that preventive action is not a 9001. I'm going to turn that around for a second and say, if you're doing the appropriate preventive action within your quality management system processes, you are applying risk-based thinking. And so if you're looking for preventive actions to add to your, whether or not you want to make them a formal preventive action within a CAPA system, but examples of preventive action, what things have you done in order to reduce risk within your quality management system processes? Implementation of an electronic document control system to prevent loss of documents. That's a preventive action. Take credit for them.
Yeah, it just thinking in some of the other, I do this guerrilla tactics for quality leadership workshop, and one of the techniques I talk about is called hide the vegetables, and it becomes sort of a hide the vegetables approach. If you're fighting people going, oh, doing this risk-based approach is going to be really hard. If you just get them into conversations about SWOT, of being preventive, being proactive, okay, don't call it risk-based approach, right? If that's going to trigger them as, another thing I got to do, then just getting them into the conversations that they want to have about the business anyway. And then what you end up doing is risk-based thinking, right? Without calling it that. You don't have to put titles on things that might trigger people. So that might be another opportunity in the hide the vegetables approach to getting people to do RBA.
because your kids don't like vegetables, so you got to hide them in the food.
Yeah. Well, I use the example of zucchini. I don't mind a little sauteed zucchini as a side dish if that's what's offered. But you make a zucchini bread, I'm all over that. That's right. And I'm not even thinking about that it's got zucchini in it or something, right? So, all right. So that's all the stuff we wanted to present. Now, we want to open it up again, right? To what are your thoughts? Are there things you want to try and stump us on? What have you seen? What are your experiences? Karen, appreciate you've been sharing a little bit of that. What else is others on the line are you seeing out there in terms of getting RBA in and, achieving, anybody have any good examples of where it created a clear business benefit?
And again, I'll invite Mark or Dale or Andrew, you guys specifically, if you have something that can help us here.
Hey guys, it's Dale. Not so
Sure.
much on the pro side of it, but going back to some of Steve's earlier comments about how the risk-based approach was brought in and some of the, I don't want to call them failure modes, but challenges that I've been seeing are that once a company documents their thinking about a risk-based approach, the external auditors use that as an opportunity to then, present their wisdom and explain how the company hasn't fully understood applying risk-based approaches and leaves an audit present in their wake that becomes almost unsolvable. So, I see both sides of certainly the pro side of making the risk-based approach and how it gets well documented into a QMS and throughout the culture of a business.
Yeah.
But was curious maybe about any of your thoughts of these audit presents that get left, which in my mind are largely opinionated as opposed to, something that's truly actionable.
It's exactly that. Auditors are allowed to have an opinion on risk in one area. When they do the audit, a risk-based decision-making, risk-based approach is this a major, minor, or not consequential? What's the risk of that non-conformance that they're finding? They are not, and I can point to 14971. It says who decides whether or not the risk is acceptable. The organization decides. So it's the people using the quality management system that get to decide, because the auditor is not working within the company. And so they can't really judge the risk to the organization. Again, they can present an opinion, but opinion is not an observation. It's an opinion. And so we're fighting a lot. And this is one of the reasons that ISO 9000 will greatly expand this concept of risk-based thinking and risk-based approach, is so that people don't misunderstand it. Is so that auditors are not applying it in a way that it's not meant to be applied. It's the reason we have a specific phrase in 1345 that says that you don't have to, apply a formal process to risk-based thinking, risk-based approach, because we wanted to avoid auditors saying you need to have a process for doing that. No, you don't. The standard says you don't. So, these are some of the things that we try to add to the standards when we're writing them. I think you'd have to give us more specifics about the area that they're talking about. If they say something like, you didn't apply the risk-based approach to calibration, you didn't apply the risk-based approach to management review periodicity. I think they'd have to apply those, because we get asked all the time, how do I show this to auditors? I tell you, have some examples that you're ready to present. In management review, we determine when the next management review is going to happen during management review, because we have all the facts and we understand the risk, and we're going to say it's going to be in a month or 3 months or 6 months, right? At the management review. And so you can point to that. You can point to how you adjust calibration periodicity. You can point to, your complaint handling is 30, 60, 90 days based on the risk of the thing. have some things that you can point to as the implementation of the risk-based approach. Because it's going to be very difficult for them to find a place that that they can say you didn't apply it here. And Steve just pointed out some of those other things too, the proportionate to risk, the timeliness things. Those are natural places where risk-based approach needs to be applied. But, I think that they would struggle finding space, to be able to write an observation that you didn't apply a risk-based approach on something, because, it's those types of things. So anyhow.
I was just going to add that when an auditor seems like they're offering an opinion, I think sometimes it's a test, right? They're trying to see, can you explain it? And Mark was just kind of getting to that, right? That, kind of like what I talked about earlier, where you just have this vague statement that says, yes, we apply a risk-based approach. Then the auditors, you're just inviting them to offer their opinion, right? And they question show me how, yeah. And then you can target that in and go, well, within a particular process, do you create an opportunity for them to ask questions where you go, well, here, we did define within supplier management how we're doing, a risk-based approach to, supplier management, which is an area you're supposed to do it. If it isn't really clear how you did that, or again, I've seen it, same kind of thing. It's, we pick our suppliers based on risk, and then there's no explanation of the methodology for that. When I'm auditing, I'm going to start asking questions going, well, what do you mean by that? Because and I might offer some opinions, kind of like a little free consulting, and try to nudge them going, can you show me how you decided that or how you're doing it? Because it's not obvious here. So yeah, you have to apply that thinking and do a good job of applying it.
You want to say more, Dale, or?
No, it's yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of devils in a detail, and yeah, I've been down the road many times, similar roads that all of you have been down. And yeah, I've just, I guess maybe a personal grievance that I have been seeing more and more external auditors jump onto the risk-based approach, risk management at a at a higher level, and not so much how it's been deployed, but kind of the nitpicking of, I disagree with the level of detail you did for this particular, insert your topic. This supplier should have been rated higher. Your justification for why going from a annual quality management review to a quarterly management review isn't, fully justified. Why 1 quarter? Why not monthly? Why not weekly? Why not daily? So,
but is that not a valid? But is that not a valid question?
Well, certainly it is, but it seems that many times, at least in my opinion, the auditors are missing the bigger picture, and they're trying to. Again, my experience has been most of these audits have gone pretty smooth, and now they're looking for the I need to leave you with something to prove that I was here mindset.
Well, yeah, I mean, you certainly run into that. Again, you always got to keep in mind that the approach for auditing, right, is first confirm that you understood the requirements, right?
Right.
Then you're actually doing it, and then then the third piece is, did you get the right results? And I think that's what they're doing. Great. You seem to have understood that you needed to apply risk-based thinking here. You said you're doing it this way. Now show me that you're doing it. And then they're going to question, like your example of, well, maybe that supplier should have been ranked higher, right? That's kind of well, how effective this? Because why is this not listed as a critical supplier? It's a main component that determines the performance of your device, and you've got them at a class B supplier, whatever, right, in your scale. Again, they could be just testing you, going, okay, explain your logic to me. And if you can successfully defend that and going, well, here's why those guys are just a B instead of an A. Now, yeah, we know there are those auditors who they're going to be too opinionated. They're not good auditors, because they should recognize when you've successfully defended it and go, yep, you guys thought about this correctly. Again, I may go, I don't necessarily agree with the outcome, but I can't write you up for that just because I don't agree. But I understand there are definitely auditors who unfortunately will stick to their guns and go, well, you didn't, so I'm going to write you up.
But this happens all the time too. I mean, I agree with Steve that there are poor auditors out there. But again, what is the requirement that you read there? The requirement is to apply the risk-based approach, risk-based thinking. Did you apply risk-based thinking? Yep, we met the requirement. What can they write as an observation then if you met the requirement? You did it, you came up with a result that they don't like. That's too bad. They're not part of your organization. Now, internal auditors probably are, but and again, providing the justification, this is what our thinking was, and this is why we did that. We've never had a problem with that supplier. They're a supplier to, other companies of doing the same things. The risk, they provide us all of their test data. Why do we need to rate them as a higher risk? So, again, be prepared to be able to provide those examples. Because if you tell me, we decided to do it quarterly, why? Well, because we were having issues with suitability, adequacy, effectiveness, and so annually wasn't often enough, so we reduced it to quarterly. Okay, why not monthly? Well, we feel that the risk is sufficiently mitigated by doing it quarterly because we haven't had any issues. Okay. Those are the types of things that you have to be able to explain, right, to the next step. All right, I'm going to call you out, Andrew. What do you got for us?
Yeah, I'm just actually entering this field, so Steve may recognize my name as attending a bunch of his lectures.
You're a frequent flyer.
I'm a frequent flyer, yes, I am, and a very enthusiastic one. I'm just sort of taking it all in. I'm in the process of getting more into the quality field, and I'm just sort of following your mini class along. So that's where I am. I'm just sort of taking it on at this point.
As you think about applying this to your career going forward, are you able to understand how you might explain the value to somebody else?
Yeah, on my earlier searching of some of the risk analysis, some of this, there's a positive side to this, and I think maybe in one of the original inceptions of the idea was that there are missed opportunities as well. It's change, and that was one of the original definitions that I remember looking at. And change could mean positive as well as negative. It's interesting that Steve brought up the possibility of market changes and things like that, and missed opportunities as well. It isn't just sort of the defensive aspect of it. It's the missed opportunities if you have the resources to somehow work on those.
Yeah, I think, as organizations look forward to this, I mean, it is a proactive thinking. It's a quality culture that we want to encourage, that uses information to make decisions rather than just deciding to do it the way that they've always done it, or the way that they experienced it at their last company, or those types of things. I mean, having actual reasons behind your decisions. That's why I say, when we talked about with Dale earlier about the decision of changing the periodicity of management review, why? And having actual facts to rely on. Rather than just being an arbitrary thing. And so hopefully you can bring that forth in your career to other people that you're interfacing with, your colleagues and so forth. So, all right, Ivona, come on.
That was very interesting. I don't have anything to add. It's always interesting. I like that. And thank you for providing a way to get to that LinkedIn group. So I'll figure out something so I see, how the inadequate response that Karen mentioned and you guys publish something. Thank you so much every Wednesday. I don't know, I have to get into that because I'm sure that would be very interesting too. It's always a joy to talk about risk. I think we can talk day and night about risk. And
warning letters are fascinating. You learn a lot if you keep an eye on them.
Yes, I'm absolutely
one, you get
sure.
to see what the patterns are. What is it FDA's hot buttons are at the moment?
Yeah.
But you get a lot of opportunity to go, oh my, let's make sure we don't do that.
What I don't understand is when they come back to close it, what do they do? Once they issue a warning letter, you answer what's the newest approach? What do they do?
Eventually
it
should get closed out publicly. There should be a a formal closeout letter. Not always. I don't know if they're consistent, but Mark, you were going to say something about that.
No, actually, well, what I was going to say is you should also recognize that FDA uses the risk-based approach in how often they come for inspections, in as they look at the observations. Is this worthy of a warning letter? Is this worthy of some other official action? When you have your closing meeting with them, they ask you, they indicate voluntary action indicated, official action indicated. It's not just, an observation. They don't do major, minor, and that kind of stuff. But all of these things are a risk-based approach. And so understand that the regulators use it. It's a natural thing to do. And so you always have to think about, what's the risk? And that's why I say you have to ask as your external auditors or internal auditors are assessing the non-conformances, what's the risk? Is this a major because it's a very high risk? Is this a minor because it's a low risk? Those types of things.
Yeah, you see that in the warning letter. Sometimes you go, well, it's obvious why a warning letter would escalate to a warning letter, because they talk about like a dozen 43 observations. And there's other ones, and you go, the warning letter is rather short. There's only like 1 or 2 43 observations or something that they're referring to. But when you think about what do those represent to the market, and you go, well, yeah, because apparently they're not watching for glass particulates in the injectable materials. So yeah, that one finding is enough to escalate it, because the risk is pretty severe. Where in other cases go, it's just on quantity. It's like, well, basically everything is wrong in your quality system and you're not getting this. So each of these individually might be minor, but you put them all together and the risk analysis says, yeah, this is bad. All right. If there aren't any other questions, we are just about at time here. Again, really appreciate people jumping on and interacting and listening for today. Again, just our contact info. Mark and I, you can find us on LinkedIn. You can ask us individual questions, but if you need help from our organization, there's our general contact email and our LinkedIn QR code to connect with us. By all means, follow us on LinkedIn to get access to our postings. Something goes up every day that hopefully will be of value. If nothing else, then an announcement. And the next time we're going to do, Mark or I are going to talk individually or do another one of these. We do these quarterly, and then we do lots of other webinars and presentations, as well as doing some consulting work. So,
And I
again,
will tell you, I'll tell you guys, you go to our website, QRxPartners.com. Our pictures are on there. Click on our pictures. You get our email directly to us. If something comes up, you get a stupid auditor, ask us a question. We're glad to answer those questions. So Dale, as it comes up, or if somebody has, something like that they're thinking about, feel free to come back and ask us, because we're glad to answer those questions.
Yeah, actually on our website, we have an Ask an Expert link. So you can just pose a question. We're happy to give some free advice.
So thanks, everybody.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Everybody enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you so much. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks,
Yep.
Mark. Thanks, Steve.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you very much.